All right. Shalom, shalom. First and foremost, we want to give all praises, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Ruach HaKodash. Double honor to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Peace, love, salutations, and blessings to the house of David, which is the Lord's elect. Right, brothers coming back again through the spirit and power of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai. With the lesson, Lord willing, it be edifying. As we're seeing how the Lord is systematically, bringing down Babylon the Great, bringing down Esau, Edom kingdom, which, is all biblical prophecy, right? And as the scripture says in the book of Sirach, right, there be 9 things that make a man happy, and the 10, right, roughly paraphrasing, he gives him joy. And one of those things is what? To see the downfall of a man, to see and live to see the downfall of his enemy, and we are blessed to be in this time where we're able to see, right, the Lord working, right, doing this wonderful work of restoring Israel, right, by giving us this knowledge and wisdom, right, by way of repentance through Yahweh Shai, and also, right, judging our adversaries, right, bringing, his wrath upon, those that have afflicted us, all right, because the scripture speaks about, vengeance, right, as Paul said, to those who are troubled, rest with us, right, and we have been troubled. Okay, in the book of Daniel, it talks about the men that are, worn out, right? By this devil and his wicked rulership. Okay, he has worn out the saints. Brothers are just speaking about the various different, stresses that we have to deal with on a day-to-day, basis, as far as it, with money, with our dynamics with our relationships. All right, the food that we eat. And the list goes on and on and on. We can complain and cry unto the Lord about a plethora of, things being underneath, this devil, right? Which ultimately the Lord did this for the, purpose of us, to complain to him, right? To sigh and cry for the abominations that are being done here so that we can, call upon him and wait upon him to plead our cause. All right. And, as we continue to watch these prophecies unfold, I came across some information, that I shared with the brothers, and Lord willing, we could bring it out on how the Lord is bringing down this place, right? And this war with Iran, a lot of it is centered around the oil, which is, probably the major resource that is being affected. But there's a lot of other things that, are being affected that will actually bring a major crisis to America and the world that are not being talked about. But when you look at, the world, and you go out into the actual, life, and see certain goods and certain resources are actually at a shortage. Now, I posted a couple days ago, let me see if I can find it, a picture of a post that was on a storefront that I went to I think it was over the weekend. Let me see if I can find this real quick. And yep, let me share this. And this was something. So I seen it, and there we go. It's like it. I can see that, right? So I had posted this, which I saw at Family Dollar store around my house. And, obviously that's not something that you see every day. So I took a picture of it. And as it says, due to a nationwide helium shortage, helium availability may be limited and can vary by store. Okay. So something that, definitely striking my attention at first was the fact that, helium, right? Something that people don't really think about. And when you do think about helium, you think about what? Balloons. So you think about parties. And the interesting thing about that is helium has way bigger, effects on, the economy than just balloons. Okay. But that's the simple mindedness of, regular everyday people. They think of helium. Parties. People see this, they're probably thinking, oh man, I won't be able to, get birthday, balloons or anniversary balloons or whatever balloons to party. But that's also the Lord showing how he is bringing down, right, the feast and the festivities of this place, because that is the least of of the concerns with this shortage when it comes to the actual economy, of helium, right? They're not the higher ups, right? These experts ain't thinking about you not having balloons for your birthday party, right? They're thinking about how this actually affects the supply chain, and which trickles down and affects everything else. Which, when we'll get into it into chat, I asked chat, what is the importance of helium, and how can this shortage affect the economy? And you'll see that it is going to have a very detrimental effect, right? Which people right now may not feel it, but as this war and as the Strait of Hormuz continues to be closed, as this persists, is going to have a real effect on everyday lives of people, way past balloons. And as we're going to see, it's not just helium, it's not just oil. There's a lot of other things that are being affected by this war. Okay. So, before we get into it, if any brothers want to say something, I got it.
Yeah, Khan. Just chiming in on that point, being that it's important to educate yourself, even at least on how these natural resources are used and what roles they actually play in your day-to-day life, because people people don't see, like, why is oil a big deal, right? Why are these resources a big deal? And you got to think about it, like, why would countries go to war over these resources? Like, clearly it must be important if you're spending millions of dollars on military equipment, which comes from raw natural resources, by the way, even the factories that are used to make them. But you're spending millions of dollars on resources to go to war over these natural resources. Clearly, it must be important to some degree. So it's not about the raw material itself, but it's about what it's used for and how that affects you. Because as society progresses and gets more and more advanced, they're looking for more and more ways to, advance the use of natural resources. Like, people would be surprised how you actually get glass, how glass is actually made, right? How these semiconductors are made, the silicone that they use, like all of these things that are the building blocks of the world that you live in come from these natural resources. And some of them, it's a combination. Like, you may have, for example, helium or some other resource that you may think, oh, by itself, like Zaquan was saying, you're thinking of a balloon, or, and they like take the air out of the balloon, and then it makes their voice very high pitched and so on. Like, that's what people are thinking about. But in actuality, it may be a partial component in a compound that is needed to make something more important for you. So if it wasn't important, they wouldn't be that notice wouldn't be on that storefront. They wouldn't have mentioned that over there. And that's to let you know that in case you start seeing shortages of other things that require helium to make, understand that that's because there's a nationwide helium shortage. And soon it's going to be more than just something like helium, because everybody was focusing on oil. Where the hell did helium come from? But that's the domino effect or the ripple effect of what's going on over there with this global energy crisis. It's not just oil, it's energy. Okay. And the world runs not on Duncan, but on energy. You got it.
Cut. That's a beautiful point. And typically, when things like this start to happen, when you look into ancient history or even recent history, you always had some form of group of people that will always come together and bring reasoning to the things that's actually happening, right? And that's why the scriptures tell you that the wise men of Teman pretty much are null and void at this point, because you've lost that council of wisdom, right? That always help govern nations. All that counsel is gone, right? So all these things that you're going to start seeing, the damages that you're seeing around this country is going to get much, much worse. And you also have to understand that the reason why these things are happening is even going back 2 years or 2 or 3 years ago, you had people like Christine Lagarde, right? And even people higher ups in the World Economic Forum who came out and said that we're entering into a transition, right? Transition period. And it was going to be painful. Okay. And they mentioned how there's going to be food shortages. You're going to have energy problems. You're going to have cybersecurity issues, right? These things that they talked about that will be happening around the world, it's all happening right now in the year 2026, right? We're seeing weather modification, being used as a weapon of destruction on an all-time level, right? You just had this whole earthquake that happened, all right, in Colombia with a 7.4 magnitude earthquake that hit Colombia. right? That's right a border to Venezuela that just got rocked with 7.2, I think, or 7.3. That was what, a month or two ago, right? So we're seeing all these things. You got a sister reached out and was mentioning how they got hit with what was it? It's like 1 second. Let me see if I can pull it up real quick here. Um, they got hit with a storm, like a tornado-like storm that shut down the power and tore up the things that were out there, right? They purposely stopped the internet, text, calls from coming through, and the system updates was the only thing that was going through. And whenever they call utility companies, they automatically was hanging up, right? They try to go through the apps or the websites, and they'll always have like error messages or failure to connect and so on and so forth, right? Apparently, food is going bad and all these different things. So the calamities that the Lord says is going to bring upon this place is happening right now, right? And like we were talking about earlier before we went live, that these things are actually hitting home. See, but the difference between the elect and the rest of the world is that our faith is what keeps us alive. We rejoice when we see these things, right? They don't shake us. They don't, make us quake. We actually, we get excited when we see these things happening. Even when it happens to us, we get excited and we say, yo, that's crazy. Like, that's when you see the spirit of the Lord that's dealing, right? It's a spirit of faith. It's a spirit of joy. It's a spirit of comfort that damn, like in the face of all these things, we don't even like see it as a problem. It's like, oh yeah, the Lord's going to take care of it. We're good. Let's keep on going. Like that's the mindset, and that's a gift of peace that no man can give you but the Lord. Okay. So going back to the point that we're going through the transition period, that's why, like before you were saying, these things are not affecting just oil. It affects every single fabric of society. Okay. And when I say transition and they say transition, what they're saying is we're transitioning from corporations that were using natural resources to create things that countries were using, known as consumers, right? But from now, they're changing it from then to now, where it's going to be AI is going to be controlling everything, and the consumers are going to be digitized and programmed to receive certain natural resources, but it's going to be on a limited scale, but it'll be digitized as well, right? So no longer can you actually use money like gold and silver. That's raw natural resources. You can't use that anymore, right? But that was something from back then. This time is going to be digital, where you're going to have a chip in your hand, and that's how you're going to use to buy and sell. So no longer we need to get natural resources to create things for consumers. We already have everything digitized and tokenized. So you people are no longer the priority for these companies anymore, right? It's now called shareholder capitalism. They're the ones who call the shots, right? If airlines decide, oh, we're not going to fly anymore, it doesn't matter how much outrage the people may give up. They're not going to care because the airline's survival is not based on the consumers. It's based on shareholder capitalism. It's based on their shareholders. However many shares the corporation has of that company, they dictate what direction that company is going in, regardless of how the people feel about it, right? So that's the transition that we're in, that these corporations, tells you in the book of James, the 5th chapter, they have amassed all the wealth unto themselves, going to the natural resources, the richest. And who's left with nothing but an earth that's pillaged and destroyed? The people. Okay? Every city, every town, they got all these data centers that's coming up there. Who do you think is going to be benefiting and who's going to be losing? So think of that from that example on a grand scale. The more data centers, think of it as the more resources that are being used, but you don't get to partake in that. Okay? So that's part of the transition. So as the title goes, this damage is deep, is deep rooted and cannot be healed because it's entered into the fabric of the system itself. Okay, it's a cancer that cannot be cured or treated. It's over with. It's terminal. Okay, as they say. I'm gonna get a quick precept and then we can roll from there. Going into the theme of the lesson, right? Jeremiah chapter 51 and verse 9, it says, "We would have healed Babylon, but she is not healed. Forsake her and let us go everyone into his own country, for her judgment reacheth unto heaven, and it is lifted up even to the skies." And that's going into what? America's terminal illness that's going to fester on and on and on into every factor of life. All right, these so-called cyber attacks that you're seeing that's affecting water doesn't end with water. Wait till it starts hitting the banks. It's like a virus now. Oh, there's another cyber attack that's affecting the food. Another cyber attack that's affecting the healthcare system. That's what you're gonna start seeing. Cyber attack that's affecting the internet and your banks and this and that. That's what you're gonna start seeing now. Okay, and that's all to what? To gain control of all your so-called ways of living. All right. It's all about that control. And then once they have that control, they collapse the system. They present to you what you have to take. If not, you can't partake in society, which is what the prophets have been telling you for all these years. We're at the door. All right. But your brothers got it.
Khan, yeah, and just I think it was a couple of days ago that the UAE got hit with a major cyber attack on their banking system, and I think their military as well. You know, so these, like how you just said, these attacks is happening in the world, right? And it's only going to progress as time, you know, moves on, because as Yahweh Shai said, these are the beginning of sorrows. Okay, with more to come. So reading this, I'm going to try to skim through it. So the first question I asked when I seen this, I said, what effects could a nationwide shortage of helium have on America, and why is there a shortage now? So it says a nationwide helium shortage could become a serious industrial and medical problem in the U.S., although it would not mean America suddenly runs out of helium balloons, because once again, that's what people think, right? But that's a way that the Lord is, you know, breaking down these idols, right? Because people idolize themselves, you know, by these celebrations, and balloons is a major part of, you know, the celebratory factor in, you know, what Babylonians do to celebrate themselves, right? So it says the important distinction is that helium is a critical industrial gas, not merely a party supply. So it's deeper than just your party supply. It says the immediate problem. Why is there a shortage now? The immediate problem is 2026 is geopolitical, but it is exposing a much older structural weakness. And brothers, whenever y'all want to jump in, you could just jump in. I can't see the screen, so you could just jump in. It says is a much older structural weakness in the helium market. Helium is unusual because it isn't manufactured economically on an industrial scale. It is primarily recovered by a byproduct of natural gas processing, and the world's production is concentrated in a relatively small number of locations. The biggest immediate shock came from the Middle East conflict. Qatar normally supplies roughly 1/3 of the world's helium. So it just goes into, you know, basically that. In March, the industrial executives were already reporting shortages and sharply higher prices, particularly affecting semiconductor manufacturing, which the semiconductor is where you get your microchips from. China subsequently announced a temporary helium export ban, a helium export ban in July, further tightening an already constrained market. And this isn't simply a temporary Qatar problem. The helium market was already vulnerable because U.S. supply has been declining, while demand, particularly from semiconductors, medical imaging, and high-tech industries, has increased. The National Academies notes that U.S. helium access has become increasingly uncertain, and that consumption has continued to rise while helium recovered from natural gas has declined. So it says, what happens in America if the shortage became severe? Think of the effects in roughly this order: balloons, higher prices, shortages, party events / businesses affected. Now, once again, you know, this is going to be the first thing, because this really is really vain. Okay, this doesn't have any real value to a society. The fact that you need balloons in a society. All right. And as we know, as it says here, party and events businesses affected. So that's the Lord, like I said before, he's basically, you know, chopping down at the idolatry that this place really, you know, promotes, and people, or should I say businesses, you know, they benefit from. All right. All of that vain glory that people do when it comes to celebrating themselves, that's going to be affected because helium is, you know, used in making balloons. MRI, more expensive helium refills, and potentially delayed maintenance. So that goes into your medical industry, right? Which people all the time are getting MRIs, for whatever type of, issues that they may have or they need to be researched in their body. But all of these things have, resources that it needs in order to work. Right? People look at an MRI machine and just think, oh, you just go in there and then you just flip a switch and it just turns on an imagery. No, there's a whole, complex mechanics that are involved in it, and you can see that America, as I said before, its structure. Where was it at? It says something about the here we go, the older structural weaknesses. So America has structural weaknesses, that are now being exposed because of this war. Semiconductors, production disruptions and higher chip costs, AI/data centers, higher. We got it.
I wanted to mention something on the semiconductors part because I looked it up here, and like I think most people know that semiconductors have some role to play in technology and the things we use. But briefly reading this here, it says semiconductors are exceptionally important because they act as the microscopic brains powering almost all modern technology, the global economy, and national infrastructure. Without them, society would lose the digital tools required for daily communication, transportation, and healthcare, which are some examples like the Zaquan read about the MRI and medical imaging and so on and so forth. And things like smartphones, computers, TVs, home appliances, right? Cars, electric vehicles, safety systems, hospital devices, power grids, AI data centers, cloud networks, and also defense systems, satellites, all of those things. So the internet that you use, it uses technology that requires semiconductors, right? In order for you to even use your phones and all these things. And the thing about it is, a shortage in semiconductors doesn't just mean you can't make new ones, like you can't make new phones or, new whatever requires it, but you also have a problem maintaining the old ones because these devices, like the motherboard of a phone or a laptop, is not meant to last forever. Eventually, something is going to go wrong with it. So it has a shelf life. And when that happens, they need to replace some part of it or they need to make a new one. And how are they going to do that without the necessary tools for it? So not only do you lose the capability, which it would have to get to an extremely dire situation for this, but eventually when you have less and less, what do you have? Rations. And that means the public are the first to go when there's rations. The governments and the military, they're the ones who get to have the reserves. The public, you don't get shit. So your shit breaks and you try to go to get your phone repaired and then you go to the phone store and then it has a sign there that says, sorry, we can't repair your phone because semiconductor shortages. Or sorry, we only have a limited stock of X, Y, and Z, and it's sold out because of this shortage. So yeah, just wanted to mention that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why, like that image I posted from the dollar store, that's why it has that on there. So you're not going to see that at every store. But even as the chat says, that when it gets to a certain point, they start to allocate based off of, importance. Which store is more important or which company is more important to or this product is more important for this company to have. Dollar store don't need helium, right? In the pecking order of things. So they're going to say, you know what, fuck that, we're not going to give the helium to y'all because we already had a shortage. We're going to allocate it more to the hospitals, or we're going to allocate it more to the data centers. So who gets affected? Your local stores when you want to go try to get some balloons. Like, oh shit, we always go to the dollar store to get balloons. Why we can't get balloons? Well, we don't got no helium. That's how that happens. That's how you become now affected by these things. But like how you said, it happens over time, gradual over time. But even as it says in this chat, that really based off of how the strain is now. They said that by the end of 2026 into 2027, it's going to be something that it's going to become a major crisis to where now the hospitals, now the data centers, now the aerospace, now all of these places are now feeling this. It's not going to just be your Family Dollar store that is being affected.
Yeah, like in other words, In other words, it's going to be that the culmination of all these different crises at the same time, right? That's what's gonna shift prophecy into the next phase, where you're gonna see people bugging out all around the world, because this is something that we're seeing developing. Like before, you were saying, this is a global thing, right? It's a global thing, and this is a global takeover. All right, these Jays are not playing. When they say what they say about how they're gonna take over the world, that's what you're seeing now. Okay, so it's a global thing. You're gonna see, like Zaquan was saying, the hospitals being overwhelmed. So you're thinking right now you may have shortages, but okay, well, the shortages starts to have an effect. And once the people start feeling the effect, like you were saying, it hits home, close to home, and even hits home directly, right? And not just home, but hits people directly, right? That's when you're gonna start seeing people bugging out, asking questions. Where are our so-called elected leaders? That's when people are gonna start losing faith in them, because it's like, yo, all we're gonna keep seeing is they come on stage, tell us that, oh, these data centers are important for us, even though we know you don't like it. And we know you don't like these new laws and new rules that we're setting up there. Remember, it's good for you guys. And I think about how it's so good for you. That's the theatrics. They fake all these cries, and now people just gotta buy it. Oh, I'm so sorry, and hey, please, like, I think dearly about the decision we're gonna make, and it's so tough on us to make this decision. But at the end of the day, it's the best thing we can do for our people. You voted us in, and this is how we're gonna go about it. And then it's like, well, but we don't want this though. Why you got to do this? We don't want this. It's like, well, we're sorry, but it's no choice. We still have to do this, right? And people are gonna start seeing it. Like, yo, like my healthcare, like I need help with this, but you guys are turning me away because of what? You know, like Zaquan, you were saying, certain countries, certain corporations, certain companies, certain uh, um, facets in society is going to be affected. And guess who's going to be the most affected? The parts that has to do with human resources, the parts that has to do with aid, like health aid and food aid and housing and all these different things that people have been so accustomed to. The so-called, what they call the benefits, all right, of this society. These things are going to affect that. All right, right now as we speak, Trump came in and he said he wants to save money for his military budget. What did he do in turn? He had to cut a whole lot of different things that people rely on, right? Section 8, this, that, after school child health care, after school child care, all these different things. He's cutting all of them, man. And very soon, the next few months, people are going to start seeing these things. Because remember, you always got this thing called, oh, there's the fiscal year. They have a budget that they have to hit and all these different things. When the time comes, they have to start putting these things in order. Then people are going to be like, yo, but we have no money for this. There's no money allocated for this. What are we going to do? 2027 is going to be, it's going to be something. It's going to be something, man. All right. Hey, just brace yourselves. That's all I'm going to say. All right. Whichever has got it.
Yes, gone, yep. And the thing is, the people, right, are not being warned by their leaders. And that's why you're going to have a lot of people, as it says in 2nd Ezra 15, not regard their kings or princes, because they're not preparing them for this. Understand that, as we even talk about the whole chat, GPT and all this, they have way, more sophisticated, machine learning, right? So this information that we have, it could probably even be, not as accurate. So the ones that they have, because I was thinking, I'm like, yo, they probably put it in there because they have that, the project Looking Glass, I think it was. They probably put it into their, computation to see, like, yo, all right, based off of these calculations that we have, how much longer do we have before we run out of this or we run out of that? They have that. And they're not letting the people know these things. They're just having the Babylonians in this state, as it says Isaiah 47, to think that they shall not see any sorrow, right? That they're not going to have, they shall sit as a lady forever. But meanwhile, you got the floor underneath you just corroding, and everybody is just looking at you like, and your your officials, your leaders are just telling you everything's fine. Like the guy in Don't Look Up, that movie, you had the one technocrat. He was telling everybody everything's fine, don't worry, everything. Meanwhile, you got a big ass comet coming toward the planet, and it's about to explode. Everything's fine, and then when he realizes that the shit's not going to work, then he hops on his little spaceship and dips out, and everybody else is just stuck here. That's the mindset of these devils, man. You see, we're reading on. It says try to skim through a little quicker. It says Reuters reported that the 2026 shortage has already begun affecting technology supply chains, with manufacturers seeking alternative supplies and facing production challenges. Now, this is just for helium. That means helium could indirectly affect AI chips, which affects smartphones, which affects computers. Then that affects automobiles. That affects data centers. That affects electronics. Just off of helium alone, right? It's particularly significant because the world is simultaneously experiencing enormous demand for advanced chips for AI infrastructure. And that made me think of how the Lord said in the book of Job. Let me get it real quick. Job, the 5th chapter, verse 12, says he disappointeth the devices of the crafty so that their hands cannot perform their enterprises. You see? So although this devil ultimately is trying to set up this, digital beast system, right? Bringing in these data centers, AI being the Godhead, and, have everybody merged by way of the chip, it's not even going to fully get to where he wants it. Because as it tells you in the book of Job, when he's about to fill his belly, the Lord is going to strike him through. He's not going to get it to where he gets to sit back and say, yes, I finally got it to its perfection. Even right now, these things they're having certain hiccups and certain issues with getting this going, which is why they're ultimately going to try to, have to bring in some type of, calamity to shock the system, as Klaus Schwab said. You're going to have to shock the system and have everybody really brought to their knees so that they can just do whatever they want to do, how they want to do it, and nobody can really, have an uproar, upcry about it. So reading on, let's see, boom. All right, so I'm gonna jump. It says, so I said this. It says, so given the current trajectory now of the shortage, and if it persists, when will this shortage start to become a major crisis? So that's why I asked about the helium, and it said basically, from now to the late 2026, severe industrial shortages, allocation, right, which we already see, which I sold with that note on the door, right, allocating what store, what company gets it, higher prices, strategic user prioritized. Okay, late 2026 to mid 2027. Now this obviously is Esau's AI guesstimation. The Lord, we know, ultimately is in control of the time of these things, and as the scripture says, it's going to come upon you suddenly, right, when you least expect it. So it says major supply chain problem becomes increasingly likely. 2027, 2028, potential major U.S. crisis if Qatar remains offline and alternative production cannot compensate. And I remember when Qatar got hit back in March, the LNG facility, and we did videos on it, and it said that based off of this just that one damage that happened back then, it said it was going to, I think it said like 70% of it was going to be offline for 5 years in order to repair it. That's where the helium comes from. So 70% is going to be offline just off of that. Now, remember, they're not even done with the war, right? They haven't even gotten to the point where shit really just gets out of control. But just off of what happened in March, 70% is offline. So yeah, it's going to get crazy once the Lord put that mind in Trump, right, to basically go all in. So let's jump. I asked another question. This is based off of that. So I said, what other shortages are happening because of the war that will have major impacts on the economy if persists? It says, and based off of the latest information as of August 12, 2026, I will actually broaden the concern beyond helium. The war and the effective disruption of the Strait of Hormuz, right? And remember, you still got the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb that is basically closed now also, are creating a cluster of shortages, and some are potentially more economically consequential for America than helium. The most important ones are oil, right? The biggest immediate economic threat. This is in a different category from helium because oil affects virtually every part of the economy. Today, the IEA estimates that global oil supplies will fall by 4.3 million barrels per day in 2026. Middle Eastern production still 8.3 million barrels per day below pre-war levels. Says if that persists, the progression is higher crude means higher gas, diesel, jet fuel, which means higher transportation costs, higher food and manufacturing costs, higher inflation, and reduced consumer spending. The U.S. is relatively insulated compared to with countries that import Gulf oil, but oil is globally priced, so Americans can be affected even when the physical oil isn't coming through the Hormuz. And before anybody else want to say something, this is why you have America's strategic petroleum reserve at its all-time low right now, because it basically America is not only using the oil that they have in their reserves to keep the oil prices in America down. They also are actually exporting oil to their other countries, allied countries that get their imports from the Gulf the Gulf region. So they're exporting oil to like European countries and other allied countries that aren't able to get this oil. So that effectively is making America's oil basically at bottom low. So as it says here, this is a risk is very high. Okay. Like I said, I can't see if anybody want to say something, but you could just chime in. It says number 2 is fertilizer, potentially the most dangerous second order shortage. This one deserves much more attention. The Gulf is a major source of urea, ammonia, and sulfur, all fundamental to modern fertilizer production.
So like
the Hormuz is.
Just wanted to mention something real quick on the oil. The last part, it said that oil is globally priced, so Americans can be affected. And what that means is that it doesn't matter that the U.S. is releasing strategic oil reserves, and so you would think, oh, the U.S. has oil, so Americans shouldn't have to deal with higher prices because the oil is being exported from the U.S. But when it's globally priced, what it means is if there's a shortage and oil prices go up, it goes up for everybody. It doesn't matter if you're in America and America is releasing oil, you're going to pay the same price. You're going to pay the same price as everybody else. So we all in this together. So don't think, oh shit, if price is going up for some country over across the Mediterranean, then I don't got to worry about it. No, you're going to need to worry about it. That's it.
Yeah. Yep. Damn, I had something I was going to say, but and that's what it is. That's why Trump was basically telling all of the oil companies to lower their taxes on the oil, because he knows that we got to figure out a way to make it seem like what is happening over there isn't actually having a direct effect on the crude oil and the diesel that is here in America. And he's trying to find different mechanism and different schemes to do so, but that's not going to work. As the brother Aharon read, that's a way to try to heal Babylon, right? But you're trying to put a Band-Aid over a gunshot wound. It's not going to be effective. This is as the title reads, a deep-rooted issue. And this is a reason why the Lord had this war as being the war that was going to bring in the destruction of Babylon the Great and ultimately the end of Esau's age. Because through globalization, which Esau, and primarily through America in the EU, the beast, really how it got its riches, right? In America, America's empire is the time where all of the earth was basically intertwined. And who was at the top of it? Esau. Who got all of the resources? Who benefited the most? Esau. Which is why when you go in really Babylon, and which is why when you go in Revelation, it tells you that all of the earth, all of the kings of the earth live deliciously with her. It's through globalization. So imagine everybody, doing fine, living good, and then this bitch comes and just fucks everything up for everybody. And then they go and she tells you, oh yeah, nah, I mean, it's going to be better once I'm done. But It ain't looking like how you said it was going to go when you initially said it. That's why when it first happened, all of the countries, right? All of the, a lot of EU countries say, "Oh, we're not getting in this war with you. We already got tricked, during Iraq. This one we're not getting tricked in." But the Lord gonna have to get drawn out because eventually this is going to turn global. All right, it's going to turn global, and you already see the effects of the damage already becoming global. But when it turns global, as it says in Revelation 17, these allied countries are going to hate the whore, and you can see why. Yeah, so read it on. It says, so don't necessarily see an immediate food. So you don't necessarily see an immediate food shortage, right? Because it goes from the natural gas. Oh, so like I skipped something. Or was it? It says yeah, the Hormuz disruption has severely restricted these flows. The World Economic Forum specifically identifies fertilizer related commodities among the major non-oil materials affected by the closure. And this is something I was thinking about as well. It makes sense why they a couple years ago started to come out with this lab grown food, right? Lab grown meat, because they're not going to be able to actually have meat being grown from farmers because of this, because there ain't gonna be no fertilizer, right? So instead of that, we're going to grow it in a lab. But guess what? In a lab, you're going to need some of these other products in order to grow, this lab grown food. So that's not even going to work out. This is why this matters. Natural gas, ammonia, fertilizer, crops, food. So you don't necessarily see immediate food shortage. Instead, farmers eventually face higher fertilizer prices, less fertilizer applied, lower yield, higher production costs, higher food prices. And the effect can lag the initial disruption because farmers may already have fertilizer inventories for current planting season. If the disruption continues into another agricultural cycle, food inflation becomes a much bigger concern. And this is something that, once again, you saw before, these farmers complaining about fertilizer prices, right? And the lack of, being able to get fertilizer. And the fact that they had to basically cut their crops in half or by a third because they didn't have enough fertilizer to basically fertilize all of their land. That has a direct effect on the consumer, aka the people. Next one is sulfur. This is a sleeper crisis. It says it affects fertilizer, sulfuric acid, copper, blah blah blah. The next one, you have aluminum, major manufacturing problem. This is another one that is easy to overlook. Remember, all of these things that we're reading are all things that are being affected by the Strait of Hormuz. And all of these are shortages that are now happening in Babylon. Okay. I mean, not Babylon, Slakia, the world. You got it.
Yeah, exactly, the world. But really, the world, typically, when you look at it, especially countries from the East, they're kind of used to hardship. They're kind of used to war, right? They're kind of used to the effects of, living the next day after your whole house been blown up, and you got nothing to live for, and you just cook in rubble, and the children there are still excited because they're just happy and grateful that they're still alive, right? You keep hearing bombings and shootings and all kinds of, that's what they're used to over there, and they still survive. But America is not used to that. America has never dealt with darkness. They've never dealt with like straight up hunger. They've never dealt with water that they can't have access to. They've never dealt with all stores that you go to all at the same time, having bare empty shelves at the same time. People are not used to that. Okay, and you have no one to go to actually help you. All these corporations that amass all this power that you have to go to for, well, the worth of all things. Now they have no answers for you. What's going on? You know what I'm saying? In the pitch darkness, the system that you always went to has collapsed and has betrayed you. Where do you go? And this is what we've been warning for all these years, that this day will come. America will see her fall, and the people will suffer for it. And what do? They called us conspiracy theories. They told us that we should stop talking, right? And now you're seeing these things. I'm going to run it back just a little bit, go back to the third one, which was sulfur. All right. And it talks about how sulfur is used for fertilizer, sulfuric acid, and so on and so forth. But right here it says pharmaceuticals and water treatment. All right. If that is affected, what's going to happen? You're going to have more of a pestilence. Okay, they're going to have more of things like Flint, Michigan, that happened a few years ago, where they can have clean water to drink. You're going to have that because when your water treatment systems are compromised in a form of sulfur not being able to be used, or chlorine, or whatever, right? These things are affected. Okay, you also have cyber attacks that's affecting the water treatment system itself. So not only the treatment systems, as in the machines, but also the products that's used for the machines to actually work. Both are down. So now what? So you don't have the water, you don't have the water treatment itself, and you don't have the process itself to even get anything done. You're screwed. Okay, you're screwed. All right. I think that's pretty much it, Zaquan. You can go ahead. You got it.
Gone. Yep. And these are the things that people don't consider, right? But as the scripture says, get a quick script in Jeremiah chapter 30, I believe. Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 24. It says, "The fierce anger of the Lord shall not return until he have done it, and until he has performed the intents of his heart. In the latter days ye shall consider it." Okay, in the latter days, that's when you're going to consider these things, man. And we are living in these latter days, and as time progresses, these problems are going to just become more dire, right? Just like how the war is escalating, these issues are escalating with it. And you're not going to be insulated, right? Speaking to you Americans, you're not going to be insulated from the effects of this war, because this is the actual anger of the Lord coming upon the whole world. Second Esdras, the 9th chapter, and primarily Babylon the Great, okay, because of the pride. Like how the brother just said, these other nations and other countries, they live in these type of scenarios. They live in poverty, or as they call it, the developing world. And when you live in that type of environment, you by nature are more humble. You by nature that's like a deterrent to being proud, right? But when you are luxurious, when you live as if you can never be touched, then you're very easily susceptible to being being proudful. And that's what you see with Americans, okay? And that's why it's a beautiful thing that the Lord gave us this knowledge and wisdom, so that we can have humility, because the Lord said what? That pride is hateful before the Most High and man. He hates a proud look. And everything you see here in America is nothing but proud people, man. Proud women, men, women, and babies. You got proud babies out here. Oh, how you have a 2-year-old just that'll talk to you crazy, right? To be mad proudful about it. But that's what America breeds, man. But the Lord he has a fix for that. We know what the fix is: pain. Because like I always say, you ain't never seen somebody proud when they in dire pain, man. Right? You go into a hospital and somebody that's in a hospice, you know what? Matter of fact, in Babylon, you might see some proud ass person dying. But yeah, but pain, that especially hunger, that's one thing. You can't be proud when you're hungry. That shit hurt. Yep. So keep on. Number 4, aluminum, right? So it says this is another one that's easily overlooked. The Gulf is a significant aluminum producing region, and the war has disrupted production and transportation. Aluminum is embedded in automobiles, aircraft, electrical equipment, construction, cans, packaging, electronics, and power infrastructure. The important issue isn't that aluminum isn't something you can simply substitute with another material without redesigning products. So, and this is how you know this is how you know this devil is not a god, because you need all of the resources of the earth that you didn't create in order to create your kingdom, in order for your kingdom to flow naturally. You see? And the Lord said, you know what? I'm going to take away the elements that he created, and let's see how you fare. And it's not going to work. So it says, next one, LNG, natural gas, potentially enormous globally. The Strait of Hormuz normally carries a huge portion of the world's LNG trade. This is especially important for Europe and Asia, which depends much more heavily on imported LNG than the United States. But there is an indirect U.S. effect. Middle Eastern LNG shortages to Europe/Asia compete for alternative LNG, which goes global, LNG prices rises, which affects the U.S. LNG becomes more valuable to export, which affects upward pressure on U.S. natural gas prices. The natural gas isn't just electricity/heating, it's also a feedstock for ammonia and fertilizer production. So LNG is connected to both the energy crisis and food crisis. Petrochemicals, the hidden shortage behind everyday products, which you have plastic, resin, solvents, synthetic materials, adhesive, packaging, coating, industrial chemicals. Let's see. Boom, boom, boom. Okay. We already read about helium. So it says the one I would not underestimate, fertilizer plus sulfur. There is a potential chain reaction here that's more consequential than any single shortage. War affects the Strait of Hormuz disruption, which affects oil, LNG, sulfur, ammonia, urea shortages, which affects fertilizer prices rises, which then farm input cost rises, which then food prices rises, then consumer inflation, and that's what's going to happen, right? You know, we spoke about it before, how famine isn't necessarily that there isn't any food, it's just the ability to obtain food. And a lot of people are going to be priced out of being able to, you know, get food. They're going to be priced out of being able to travel, right? Because you're still going to have certain people traveling. That's why the scripture says a man shall desire to go into a city and shall not be able. It's not necessarily that there won't be no flights. You're just going to get priced. Majority of people, aka the 99%, is going to be priced out of flying. You have a flight, a ticket that normally costs $200, now costs $1,200. Who's going to do that? Nobody's going to know. And then you say, we're going to take a road trip. Okay, but gas now is $10 a gallon. What do you ain't going to do? You're not going to do anything, man. You'll own nothing. You'll live. You're going to, hey, man, it's going to be hell on earth, even more so. Because people right now don't realize that this is a hell. So the Lord going to show you. Speaking to you Israelites. Let's see. Blah, 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 blah. So yeah, we're at the end of this. It says, meanwhile, okay, and consumer inflation, Federal Reserve faces pressure to keep rates higher, borrowing and investment slows. So now that's going to affect the actual stock market. Meanwhile, helium plus aluminum plus petrochemical shortages means higher semiconductor manufacturing costs, higher prices, plus production delays, slower industrial growth. This is how a regional war can turn into a global stagflation shock. It says, if the current situation persists for another 12 to 24 months, I'd rank the risk roughly oil and fertilizer, oil, fuel, fertilizer, ammonia, and urea being the highest, right? And then, as you see here, I'm not going to read all that. So yeah, basically, I'll read this last. It says, this is why the latest IEA assessment today is particularly significant. It says the 2026 global oil supply deficit has actually widened rather than the market simply normalizing after the initial shock. So basically, as this is saying, that it's only getting, worse, right? The oil, which once again, not just the oil, but everything, the deficit is actually widening. So as time progresses, and as these things continue to, have a lack of being able to be produced and being able to, traverse throughout the various different parts of the earth, there's going to be an actual effect on the people, okay, in your living conditions, your living standards. Got a quick precept, and then that'll be it for me. Ezekiel chapter 7, verse 26. It says, actually, it's 25. It says, destruction cometh, and they shall seek peace, and there shall be none. So there's not going to be any peace, right? Because only destruction is coming. Only evil is coming, right? When they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction. Verse 26, mischief shall come upon mischief, and rumor shall be upon rumor. Then shall they seek a vision of the prophet, but the law shall perish from the priest and the counsel from the ancients, right? And as a reason, NLT, calamity will follow calamity. And you see that happening, right? When it comes to even these pestilences, it's like every other day, there's another pestilence that is plaguing America. I just seen that now they have another beef recall. Okay, you still got the explosive diarrhea. You had another incident in, I think, in 2 states where they have some type of deadly bacterial, and it's always that some deadly bacterial flesh eating shit, man. Like when has that become so consistent now? But that's the Lord is doing that, bringing these plagues, right? And it says rumor will follow rumor, meaning what? It's just going to be bad news after bad news, because that's how the Lord is bringing this place down. All right, but I mean, if y'all brothers got anything.
Yeah, I was going to say one last thing, which is just keep in mind that today's forecast is not tomorrow's, and the things we're seeing is based off of today. But literally in a week, something major could happen that just exacerbates that. So if today's forecast is already bad, tomorrow's might be worse, and the day after that might be worse. So that's the danger of the unpredictable situation we're in. But hey, all praises to Yahweh Shem Yahushua anyway.
Yeah, God, yep. And that's why the Lord, told us to keep, our eyes single, because if you're not paying attention to these things and you become, settled on your lease, then you may think, oh, the Lord delayeth his coming. And then that's when you're going to get, a rude awakening. But if you're always watching, if you're always upon your watchtower, then when it comes, you're like, oh, I've been waiting for you to come. And that's the spirit that the Lord wants us in. As he says, when his Lord comes, he wants to find him so doing, right? Being active in watching, so, we'll close it out with that, Lord willing. This was informative and edifying unto the elect, right? Just want to show that, this is only going to, get worse as time progresses. And although you may not see it today, as a brother just said, you're going to see it, right? Even as Zelensky said, you don't feel it now, but you will feel it. You will feel it, So, hey, with that, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakah Kodash. And until next time, Shalom unto the elect.